Hello, this is Stephen Roselle, Technical Specialist with Autodesk. I'm going to review the new and improved UV editing tools and workflows in Maya 2015. So, as many of you know, UV editing has been in need of a facelift in Maya for a number of years, and this is actually probably the biggest release we've had on the UV editor front in recent memory, certainly in the last 3 or 4 years, maybe longer. So long overdue updates, and I'm going to cover everything over the course of this presentation, but I'm going to start with one of the cooler new improvements, and that is the new Unfold 3D algorithm for laying out kind of organic UV shells. So we'll go into the UV editor here, and what you'll see here is I have a head, and for the head, basically, I have no UVs. So what I want to do is actually go in and create some UVs to start, and kind of the manual way of doing this would be to go in and create a simple planar map, say from the front of the character, and then go in and break the existing UVs into shells. So we can essentially go in and grab some edge loops. Let's say maybe grab an edge loop around the back of the head here, and we have to apply a cut, and then we can go in and basically unfold that. So if I grab all the UVs here and I go into the unfold tool, which you'll see is highlighted in green, indicating it's been updated, and you'll see that I've got two methods. I've got the unfold 3D method and I've got the legacy method. So I'm just going to set this to legacy just to show you what the old one would do, and then we'll talk about the new one. So if I just apply that, what you'll see is it does indeed unfold my UVs. However, the way that it unfolds them is less than desirable. So does an okay job in some areas, but it doesn't do a good job in distributing evenly the layout of the UVs, and it also doesn't preserve symmetry at all. Also, if I were to break these into shells, let's say take this and cut this out, and then go in and apply that unfold again, what you'll notice is that the size of my shells gets completely thrown off. So now I have this tiny little head and this giant neck, which doesn't do anybody any good, especially this guy. So let's undo that and go back a couple of steps. And what we're going to do is just reapply this using the new Unfold 3D algorithm. So I'll switch to Unfold 3D. I'm not going to change any settings. I'll do a simple apply. Actually, I have to make the selection first. That would help. So let's grab the UVs, and I'll go in and apply that. And what you'll see is just by default, without changing anything, I get a significantly improved unfold. So you'll see I get very nice proportion or distribution of the UV shell, but I also get preserved symmetry just inherent in the shape. And unlike earlier, if I were to go in and say add an edge loop here and cut that and then reapply the unfold, what you'll notice is that it does a very nice job of packing the existing shell. So there's a pack option, which when on will preserve the relative size of each shell that gets created. We have a few other options that are important, but that you'll most likely always leave on. Prevent border intersections, prevents any existing or rather resulting borders from overlapping, and then a prevent triangle flips, prevents internal triangles from flipping inadvertently, which again, you'll most likely leave those all on most of the time. So it's really just a click and you're done workflow. You don't have to finagle a bunch of parameters in order to make it work. So now that I've shown kind of the basic result, I'm going to show you a more advanced way of working with this underlying tool. So again, we can get really nice results using this method, but the problem is getting to those results is a bit cumbersome in the way that you have to create UVs, in the way that you have to kind of, in a backwards way, go in and define where your borders are. So we've written a bonus tool that basically automates or kind of guides you through this process. So it's under the bonus tools menu for 2015, and it's called AutoUnwrapUVs. It's actually been around for a while, but it has been updated to incorporate the new Unfold 3D algorithm. Now the way this works is it basically starts from the beginning, allowing you to define your edge borders at the front end as opposed to the back end. So I'm going to open up this same file, and what you'll see is now I can grab the face, and rather than creating my own UVs, all I have to do is just enter the tool. And then after entering the tool, it gives me a series of heads-up displays, which will guide me through the setup process. So it basically tells me, okay, you need to predefine some texture borders. I'll go in and I'll grab that same texture border right here, double-click select, add border, continue, and it will automatically create the UVs and automatically unfold the resulting shell. The cool thing about this is I can either be done and satisfied with this, or I can click the go back button, and that will essentially step me one step back in the process. It remembers what I did before and then allows me to add an additional selection. So I can add a selection for the top of the head. I can go in here and I can add another selection for, say for instance, the collar, which I may want to actually have as a separate shell. So let's get one more there. And I'll simply say add borders. Again, it keeps track of everything along the way. I say continue, and it automatically unfolds and relays that out for me. So let's just do another couple of examples. We'll go back. And one thing that's nice about this is that it uses Maya's symmetry option. So if I turn on symmetry, sorry, I had to pause there and switch my symmetry settings to world and bump up my tolerance because the object is scaled up a bit. Now you can see I'm actually getting symmetry in my selection, so then I can come in here and select down the side of the character, and I'll just continue maybe down through the neck all the way to the border there. And it looks like I actually missed this one here. There we go. Now I can go in and add borders. And basically now I've got two shells on the side of the head and around the base. I simply say continue, and it will re-unwrap that. Now likewise, if I want to add borders, I can. If I decide I want to remove borders, I can. So I can go back in the process and I can say, well, I really want to stitch this head back together again up to this point. So I'll just do an edge path selection. I'll say remove the border this time and continue, and it'll recalculate everything, giving me the resulting shells, which are basically the face laid out with the back of the head and the ears and the collar, all proportionally laid out based on the proportional pack algorithm. So when I'm done, I simply say click done, and I'm finished, and I can move on to the next step. Now, one thing you'll notice as part of the Auto Unwrap tool, we have an option here to create a checker shader, which is the default. And if I just hit the 6 key, you can actually see that. So it uses a standard Maya shader in order to generate a checker pattern, which I can then use to pre-visualize or preview kind of the distortion of my resulting texture. It also shows up in the 2D editor. Now again, this is just using a standard Maya node. So if I were to go in and graph the material on this, what you can see is this is just using a standard Maya checker shader. But new in 2015 is the ability to actually pre-visualize a checker shader without requiring a software shader at all. So I can actually go in here and I can just do a quick shader assignment of a Lambert, let's say. And you can see there I just get my default shading. And then I'll go into my UV editor. Let's actually just expand this a little bit. And what you'll see is I've got a couple of different shading options. I have a checkered, which basically gives me a series of tiled checkers with a gradient going from one corner to the next, so I can see where my tiles begin and end. But this allows me to preview the distortion of my textures so that, for instance, if I wanted to go in and, say, redistribute the back of the head, I could go in here and I could grab, for instance, a UV right here, and then I could use something like my soft move and my soft select, and let's dial that down a little bit, something like that, and I can begin to redistribute my UVs based on what I'm seeing as a result of the checker shader. So there you can see the checker being kind of redistributed. Now another thing that I can do if I don't want to view the checker pattern is I have an option for a distortion shader. So I'm going to turn the image off and I'm going to turn checker off, and I'm going to go in and turn on distortion highlighting. And what distortion highlighting will do is it will give me a view of where my texture is essentially squashed and stretched, wherever it is distorted. So in some areas I have more compression, in some areas I have more stretching. Now one way to see this is to go into the show menu and turn off your selection highlighting. That way you don't actually see the interference of the UVs. And then I can basically go in and I can start to play with areas like the nose, for instance, where I might want to actually go in and grab something like the tip of the nose and turn on soft select, and then just dial that down a little bit. And you can see that as I start to scale that in or out, then I'm actually going to change the distortion. So I can grab that UV there, grab that UV there, and pretty quickly I can go in here and start to rescale these so that I get less distortion in that particular area. Same thing with the chin here. You can see I'm getting distortion there. I can grab that, scale it out. I might want to bring up my soft select there a little bit and do something like that. And it's basically just a give and take at this point of where you can tolerate distortion and where you can't. So these are nice new display features. These are purely hardware display modes, so they don't actually affect the underlying texture. I just simply turn that off and I get my original shader and original texture back. So unfolding a simple head is fairly straightforward, but I want to show how or rather Unfold 3D holds up with more complex objects and characters in particular. So what we have here is a full body, and as you can see, it's fairly dense mesh, and I've got a lot of muscular detail going on here. And I want to basically unfold this in one fell swoop. So I'm going to go into the UV editor just to show that there are no existing UVs, and then we're going to open up our AutoUnwrap tool, which will use Unfold 3D under the hood. So now I'm going to basically go in and start to break this up into shells visually in 3D space. So I'd basically go in and I would select edge loops and I would add those as borders until I break this up appropriately. Now I took about probably 15 minutes or so and went through a couple of experiments, basically trial and error, and I came up with a few sets that are different variations. And I'm just going to go to the most recent one I created here. And I'm going to use this. This is simply a selection set. All it's doing is selecting the borders that I want to use, and I'm going to add those as my borders. So what you can see here is that it basically, should bring those borders back up. It basically created borders along the head and facial jawline. It created borders around the back of the neck, through the shoulders. It separated out the back from the front of the torso, separated out the arms, and then created seams wherever I could to make them less visible, basically the back underside of the arm, all the way through the fingers and so on. And then same thing for the legs, around the crotch line, for lack of a better word, down the inseam and around the fingers, or rather the toes in this case, so that I could unwrap the leg and the feet all together. So it's a pretty straightforward way of unfolding a character. Oftentimes you have to do this in pieces, but the advantage of using AutoUnwrap along with Unfold 3D is you can basically, with trial and error, go in and try these different variations, ultimately add the edges that you want to define as your borders, and then just simply say continue. So now it's going to do a default projection, and then it's going to go in and calculate the unfold of all of the resulting shells. So this should take under a minute, probably about 30 seconds. I'm just going to pause until it's done. So again, that took under a minute to lay everything out, and what you can see is the result is quite nice just by the default. So what I have is the torso here. I have the two legs with the various toes all separated out. I have the hands up here, I have the back here, and then I have the face right in here, which actually looks quite nice in its own. So what I can do to visualize this, of course, is let's just say that I'm done with a tool. So let's pull the UI off to the side over here, and we'll go in and just turn on our shell shading just so that we can see, or rather our distortion shading, just so we can see the end results. Now in order to see this, I'm going to turn off my selection highlighting so I can actually see this on my object. And what you can see is that wherever I end up with white, I've got no distortion. Wherever I get red, I get compression. Wherever I get blue, I get stretching. So now it's just a matter of going in and figuring out how I want to refine this. So the head ended up being smaller than it needs to be. So I'm going to go in and grab that shell, and I'm actually just going to go in and scale that up. And as I do, you can see it starts to change the distortion highlighting. I may want to make that much bigger so that I can have more detail, but you get the basic idea. I can now go in and I can grab particular areas. Let's say grab this UV here, and I can go in and scale this with a little bit of soft select. Let's dial that up. And now I can go in and I can start to scale that in or out in order to remove some of the distortion. And this is just a matter of, again, trial and error until I get something appropriate. In a lot of areas where I get distortion, it's not really going to matter, but I want to remove it wherever possible in the areas that do matter. So one other thing to point out about the end result is, let's turn off the distortion highlighting, is the symmetry that is created. So I have a symmetrical character clearly, but the resulting shells also end up being laid out almost perfectly in symmetry. So it lays them out separately initially, and oftentimes when you're dealing with a character, especially maybe if it's in the distance, you might want to have the left side of the character share the same texture. So what I can do is I can go in and I can grab this shell here, and I'll just turn off my soft select, and I'm going to go in and just flip that shell and then just kind of position that. Actually, let me just grab the UVs there. There we go. So I've flipped those around, and now I can basically position this over this other shell. And if I get in really closely, what you can see is I have pretty much exact symmetry. Now, one trick, which is actually a bonus tool that you can use for aligning these up perfectly, is a simple little tool called Align UVs. So if we go into Bonus Tools and use Align UV Shells, what this allows you to do is simply grab a UV from each shell. So I'll grab a UV from that shell and a UV from this shell. You don't need to grab the entire shell. And then I want to say I want to align that to the right, and I want to align this to the top, and bam, I have two shells that are perfectly aligned. Now, as you can see, these were unfolded separately, but they unfolded identically, but in a symmetrical fashion. So I could do that same thing with the left leg now, but what that means is I can share texture across the left and right side of my character. So I might want to actually go in here and take something like the head and maybe move it off into its own tile over here, and I might want to scale that up. Whoops, let's grab the middle manipulator. I might want to scale that up to be much larger size and begin to essentially come in here and kind of maximize my space. And then ultimately I might want to go back into my 3D view and actually turn on my checker display so that I can actually see the relative texture size of each shell. And what you can see is the result is I get very even texture density across the broader parts of my character, body parts, and then I've gotten a denser layout here with the face because I've scaled that up. This is just another way of kind of visualizing the end result. So again, as you can see, you can get very, very nice results, very high quality results incredibly quickly using this tool without a lot of effort. A little bit of trial and error, but otherwise it's not a lot of manual effort. So I want to show one final example of a non-character situation. So here we have a tree. This is obviously a very complex shape and form, which would be difficult to unwrap manually. So I'm going to use the AutoUnwrap tool, and we're going to use Unfold 3D as the underlying algorithm. And I'm going to turn off the checker shader because we'll use the UV editor shading. So now we'll just enter into the tool, and that will ask me to define my borders. So I could manually go in here and begin to click and select edges and add those as borders. As with the last example, for time's sake, I'm actually going to go in and use a quick select set where I've gone in and kind of predefined some borders and then just say add. That will actually generate the texture borders in advance so that when I click continue, it's going to use those borders for the unfold. So now in a matter of seconds, literally, it unfolds the tree and it gives me kind of my first pass results. And again, it took a little while to get to this point, but now that I'm here, I can see that I need to make a few changes. So for instance, I've got this one area inside the knot of this trunk that needs to be opened up. So I can basically go back a step, remembers everything that I did, all the borders. Now I can go in and I can add new borders. So let's say I wanted to add a border from there to there, and then I might want to go in and open up the inside so that that'll actually kind of spread out. So now I'll add that. All that does is it adds the border, doesn't actually unfold yet. One thing I want to point out is that you can work in both 3D and 2D. So while you're working in this tool, you can also go to the UV editor and you can find problems here. And I can say, well, I really want to go in and take this branch here, which is this long skinny branch, and I want to break it into two. So I'll select that edge. I'll just say add borders, and it adds the same functionality there. So I can work in 2D and 3D back and forth in order to get the appropriate results. So now what I want to do is go in and just say continue. It'll calculate everything, unfold the shells once again, and it'll give me a better result. So you can use the default unpacking that comes with this. Of course, you can also go in, let's just say done there. You can also go in and you can use my unfold tool if you want to optimize this a little bit further. So what I'm going to do is actually go in here, bring up my unfold tool. I'm going to set my prescale to be object space, and then I'm going to set my rotation to be free so that I can pack this a little more tightly. So I'll lay that out. And now you can see it's rotated all of those branches so that they're nice and linear and they take up the most amount of space within my texture square. So now I can go in just to see the final result. I'll turn on my checker shading here. And what you can see, and again, I'll just go in like I did before and turn off my selection highlighting, is I get this really, really nice texture distribution. So if you take a look at the branches and the checker pattern going down each one of these branches, it's very, very similar in size and proportion to the texture that's going around the trunk or that's going around the roots. So again, it gives me a very, very even texture distribution with very minimal effort, and using the AutoUnwrap tool as a guide, you can really get through this process very quickly, much more quickly than before. So it's a very, very cool feature, and one of the cooler features I think in Maya 2015. Definitely check it out and have fun. Take care. Bye.